Jesus said to the 12, "Whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Whoever welcomes a prophet in the name of a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. And whoever welcomes a righteous person in the name of a righteous person will receive the reward of the righteous. And whoever gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones in the name of a disciple, truly I tell you, none of these will lose their reward." The gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
There's been a great deal of talk in our country lately about personal rights and individual freedom. And I believe this intent focus on personal rights, personal independence, and personal freedom over and against what is important for the greater common good is really causing considerable harm in our culture. We are seeing this played out in multiple ways. Just one example is the mask-wearing controversy, as some people choose not to wear a mask, citing their personal freedom, their understanding of personal freedom and liberty, thereby making individual freedom more important than the common good and care and love of neighbor. Rooted in hardcore, toxic individualism, this concept and perspective of personal independence and perceived personal freedom has become an idol. In fact, one could say the great idol of our present age is personal independence. However, the truth of the matter is that any time we worship an idol, any idol, we are enslaved to that idol, and we are not free. We are anything but free. So I find it fascinating that on this day we hear the words of St. Paul in his letter to the Romans, words that are both rather offensive but also necessary. It is true that when Paul uses the word slavery, his understanding of this word was considerably different than ours. He lived in an age when the relationship between slave and master needed no explanation. The Greco-Roman world assumed a slave economy in which most people served those placed above them. Well, that does not make it right. Slavery at that time was understood and accepted by all. In our day, the word slavery recalls hundreds of years of a despicable social evil and the continued inequality and oppression the African American people still face because of this sin. We hear the word slavery and we are reminded of a sinful practice that has not only adversely shaped our nation, but created a rupture and wound so great it continues to shape us as we face the many aspects of the sins of systemic racism, bigotry, and white supremacy, all of which we find present in today's culture. So as we look at Paul's message on this day, we need first to get beyond our understanding of the word slavery, to understand Paul is talking about the idea of ultimate allegiance, loyalty, obedience, and service. When Paul uses the metaphor of slavery, it is important to understand he is talking about what it means to surrender your life to the control of another. And understanding slavery in this way, we find that we are all slaves of one sort or another. Well, we are people who are heavily invested in the illusion that we think for ourselves, choose for ourselves, and do for ourselves. The reality is there are so many things that control our lives. Money, personal wealth, Wall Street, success, fashion, sports, physical fitness, family, keeping up with the Joneses, whomever they may be, politics, the way we spend our leisure time, addictions of all kinds, even our sense of freedom and patriotism. The list goes on and on and on. All we need to do is pay attention to what occupies our thoughts and how we spend our time and money, and we will discover that which truly enslaves us. Not only are we enslaved to many of these things and aspects of life, we have built large cathedrals and shrines where we can worship these idols. Note our big sports facilities and the shopping malls one can find in almost any community. We are all serving something or someone, and today's words from St. Paul invite us to ask the question, whom or what do you serve? Whom or what do I serve? The Apostle Paul sees only two possible answers, two possible masters, righteousness or everything else. Paul says the only two possible masters are God or sin. Quite honestly, Paul sees nothing wrong in having a master because he knows everyone has one. But who or what is that master? It is whom you serve that makes all the difference. And that difference comes when we place our ultimate allegiance, loyalty, obedience, and service in and to God. Quite frankly, our loyalties to anything other than God enslave us in sin. And it is only by turning around, repenting, letting go of the many idols in life, and placing our loyalty in God alone that we begin to understand what true freedom really is all about. Only then are we liberated to truly live. You see, we are all under sin's domination, but for those baptized into Christ's life, death, and resurrection, the power of sin has been destroyed. We have been freed from sin's power. And the greater power that has broken sin's shackles from our lives is God's grace. Through God's unmitigated, unmerited, and unrelenting grace, we have been set free from the power of sin. This is not a grace that simply enables us to feel better about ourselves. This is not a grace that simply enables us to live life after death. No. This is a grace that follows us like a hound dog and pursues us with God's love. This is a grace that invades our lives and showers us with God's mercy. This is a grace that changes us and transforms us and declares us righteous before God. This is a grace that opens for us the way that leads to a new way of being and living, the way of God's life, the way of eternal life, the way of life that truly matters right here and right now. It is grace alone that breaks the chains of sin and then safely holds us in the shackles of God's righteousness. Freed from the bonds of sin, we are now bound irrevocably to God. Paul exclaims, "Thanks be to God that you, having once been slaves of sin, have become obedient from the heart. Having been set free from sin, you have become slaves of righteousness." And bound to God, we are called to be engaged in the mission of God in this world. Having been freed from sin, We are freed for living into God's mission, which begins now. God's mission is here. And God's mission is all about the healing of the world, bringing wholeness to humanity, living in ways that show care and love of neighbor, and living into the renewal of creation itself. Having been set free, we all get to join that mission because we have been drafted and grasped and enrolled by God's grace. Friends and followers of Jesus, we have been captured by grace and bound or shackled to God's righteousness. Paul tells us we are now living under grace and not under the law. This grace is what makes us truly free. And when we live into God's grace, we find our deepest freedom rests not in our own personal freedom to do what we want to do, but rather in our freedom to become who God wills us to be. We can make choices and decisions to intentionally live God's grace because we have been freed from the entanglements of the world, the entanglements of our very selves, the entanglements of culture, the entanglements of anything that would hold us captive. However, the freedom from all these idols, from the prison of our own illusions, from all that would hold us captive, only leads to flourishing life if it is linked to freedom for a higher, heartfelt commitment, one that is always about love of God and love of neighbor. Living into the freedom we have been given means living a cross-shaped life. It means living our lives knowing we are bathed in the love of God that comes down to us and holds us, but also always, always, always living our lives in such a way that we embody that love by caring for and loving our neighbor. And as today's gospel reading tells us, when we do this, we welcome God's very self, the risen Christ's presence among us. Friends, we have been freed to serve, to love, and care for our neighbor, not because we must, but because we can. Because love flows into love and grace begets grace. Having been baptized into Christ, our ultimate allegiance, loyalty, obedience, and service are all now found in God, who has made us truly free. That is the freedom we are joyfully called to celebrate every single day. That is the freedom we are called to live into as we engage in God's mission in this world. Amen.